It was the day before New Year's Eve, and I flew back to England. I had just had a wonderful time celebrating Christmas with my friends and family in Long Beach, and now I was back in Norwich, still missing all of my friends and family back home. And yet all of my university friends were either still back at home or out traveling for the holiday break. So wanting to celebrate New Year's party, or wanting to celebrate New Year's Eve with other people, even strangers, I sought out a New Year's Eve party that was being organized by the university student union. But when I arrived at the location that had been publicized, there was nothing going on. I wandered around looking for the party with no success, so I headed back to my flat alone. At midnight, I heard people setting off fireworks in celebration. Because of its higher latitude, in late December, the days in Norwich are over 2 hours shorter and the nights over 2 hours longer than here in Los Angeles. And when the nights last more than twice as long as the days, well, that can be really depressing. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, when I got back, I didn't adjust to the time, and so I was still on Pacific time, which meant that for 2 weeks straight, I was going to sleep around 5:30 or 6:30 a.m. and waking up about 2:30 or 3:30 p.m. In other words, I was basically sleeping through the daylight. I was seeing less daylight than people living in Anchorage and Reykjavik. And it was rough. You know, I had challenging times before that, but that was the first time that I remember feeling really properly depressed. I had my final papers to work on for the semester, but even that was a struggle, and so I just kind of turned into a hermit, complete with the requisite scruffy facial hair. And for 2 weeks, I didn't want to do much of anything. I only left the flat a couple of times just to head down to the local grocery store. Although I wasn't familiar with it, I could certainly relate to the sentiments in that William Dunbar poem. And yet at the same time, I knew that this too would pass. My friends would return from their travels. I would finish up my term papers. The next semester would start and my sleep cycle would eventually adjust and the days would grow longer. And I think the knowledge of that helped make it bearable. And we, to some degree or another, have all experienced these moments of depression or despair. Perhaps it's rooted in a financial hardship, the loss of a job or a house, maybe the death of a loved one or the end of a relationship. Some of us struggle with traumas which can resurface at any moment, fresh and painful. It might be an abusive situation we feel trapped in, or the decline of physical or mental ability, a medical treatment we can't afford, or a terminal diagnosis for which there is no cure. And of course, some of us struggle with mood disorders or mental illness, which can make the day-to-day seem overwhelming, necessitating therapy or medication or both in order to cope. And although these are comparatively commonplace, their effects can nevertheless be debilitating. And so whether it's caused by a chemical imbalance or a challenging situation, some of us have experienced times when the darkness of depression can feel so pervasive, so overwhelming that one can't even see that glimmer of light on the horizon, can't imagine that the darkness can or will ever dissipate. When you don't have hope, writes psychologist and author Dr. Karen Hall, you have no energy or motivation for therapy or for any effort to change your situation. What's the use in reaching out to people? You're sure to be rejected. Why bother exercising or cleaning your home or volunteering? It won't really make a difference. You know you will always be lonely, depressed, anxious, unemployed, or stuck in the same situation that is making you miserable. You don't even want to risk the pain of further disappointment by even trying. And unfortunately, this painful despair and resignation sets up a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have no hope, no belief in therapy, or that any action you take will make any difference, then that may well be the outcome. So how can we orient ourselves towards hope in such situations? Dr. Hall suggests several strategies. Find a clear path. Being able to see the steps that you are taking will lead to desired change is critical to having hope. If you don't logically see how what you are doing can have a positive result, then carrying out the plan will likely be difficult. So write down each step that you need to take to get you where you need to be. If someone else is working with you, then push them to explain how the steps lead to the results you want. Look for role models who found solutions. Their stories might inspire and give you encouragement. Perform acts of kindness, which triggers the release of serotonin, which has an antidepressive effect. Do what you know you can do. When you're in despair, taking one step that's out of your routine can help break the sense of powerlessness you have. Make your bed, cook dinner, talk to a friend. Take a step you know you can do, and that action can make a difference over time. Keep doing it and then try to add more actions. Overcoming the inertia of helplessness can help you build hope. Some of us may turn to our faith, that a higher power is with us, not necessarily fixing the situation, but simply that we are not alone. Or practice mindfulness. Oftentimes our hopelessness is rooted in remembering situations that didn't work out or were painful, and just replaying those memories. And so by trying to stay in the here and now, one may find more peace and less stress. It's hard work. It's not easy. But those steps are there for you, should you need them. And it seems to me that we also need practices to find hope, not just for ourselves as individuals, but as a community. We need sources of collective hope because of the times we live in, and because we want to create something better for ourselves and for future generations. And in order to do that, I think we need to take in that another meaning of darkness. The darkness of the unknown, of the future that has not yet been written, and which holds infinite possibilities. In her great book, Hope in the Dark, whose title was obviously an inspiration for the service, Rebecca Solnit writes, "Hope locates itself in the premises that we don't know what will happen, and that it is in the spaciousness of uncertainty is room to act." When you recognize uncertainty, you recognize that you may be able to influence the outcomes, you alone or in concert with a few dozen or several million others. Hope is an embrace of the unknown and unknowable, an alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists. Optimists think that things will be fine without our involvement. Pessimists take the opposite position. Both excuse themselves from acting. It is the belief that what we do matters, even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact, are not things that we can know beforehand. There are countless stories in history of changes that were unimaginable. Who could imagine going against the divine right of kings as the governing law of the land back in the 1600s? How did we get from the repression of the Stasi and the secret police to the collapse of the Berlin Wall? How did we get from raids on gay bars to marriage equality? How did we get from the Trail of Tears to Standing Rock? And yes, that one, as many of these are movements still in progress. The status quo, writes Rebecca Solnit, would like you to believe it's immutable, inevitable, and invulnerable, and a lack of memory of a dynamically changing world reinforces this view. In other words, when you don't know how much things have changed, you don't see that they are changing or that they can change. Those who think that way, they're trapped in a sense of this, the way it is the way it's always going to be. And if we do that, we can't recognize the forces of change at work. And sometimes that repression, that suffering can be really hard. It can take its toll on itself. And so sometimes we do need to take care of ourselves and find places for comfort and healing and rest. And in that we call on that other's type of darkness. As Unitarian Universalist religious educator Jackie James reminds us, darkness brings relief from the blinding sun, from scorching heat, from exhausting labor. Night signals the permission to rest, to be with our loved ones, to conceive new life, to search our hearts, to remember our dreams. The dark of winter is a time of hibernation. Seeds grow in the dark and fertile earth. And one of the other things that I've noticed in the past few weeks growing in that dark, fertile earth are mushrooms. And I don't know about you, but they've been popping up all over my yard in unexpected locations, seemingly all at once. Yet I know that they didn't come from nowhere. Those tiny mycelial networks, like roots, have been spreading through the ground for months, waiting for the right moment. And then the rains came, and boom, mushrooms everywhere. That's the way that movements for change work, like mycelium spreading underground, creating networks, storing energy, and getting ready until the conditions are right for fruiting. And then, in what seems like a moment, massive change can happen. And then out of those moments, new growth can come because those mushrooms are spreading their spores far and wide. Like with other activists and other movements in different places and times who take inspiration from what has already been done. We can't know the impact of our actions beforehand, and that, I think, is a source of hope. As Rebecca Solnit writes, we may not, in fact, know them after either, but they matter all the same. History is full of people whose influence was most powerful after they were gone. And so, waiting for a sense of certainty of what we're going to do is going to make a difference is entirely unhelpful. It can't be. Hope isn't about certainty. It's not about guarantees. As the wise princess and general Leia Organa said, hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it, you'll never make it through the night. In the wake of the 2016 election, there was a lot of stuff I was worried about. But probably the biggest one was climate change. And I had this feeling that we had just doomed future generations. But I knew that that's discounted the uncertainty inherent in darkness. And I didn't give up because I knew that I couldn't, that I needed to keep working. And in the past few weeks, this is what I love about hope. In the past few weeks, I've been thrilled by the plans within this newly elected Congress to start developing a Green New Deal, which after this coming presidential election would help us decrease the destruction caused by climate change while simultaneously making our economy more just by creating countless jobs where they are desperately needed. Now, we don't know exactly what it will look like yet, but I found a great deal of hope there. And this too, this Green New Deal, did not arise from nothingness. It's been discussed. I know, I've been hearing about it since the mid-2000s. It was picked up by Barack Obama during his 2008 campaign. Unfortunately, it was quietly shelved after Republicans overtook Congress in 2010. But it continued slowly evolving and developing in small ways, both intellectually and on the ground, by activists, waiting for that right moment to reemerge. And now, with an 81% public approval rating, that time seems to be drawing near. Anything could happen. And whether we act or not has everything to do with it, writes Solnit. I say this to you not because I haven't noticed that this country has strayed close to destroying itself and everything it once stood for in pursuit of empire in the world and the eradication of democracy at home, that our civilization is close to destroying the very nature of which we depend, the ocean, the atmosphere, the uncounted species of plant and insect and bird. I say it because I have noticed. Wars will break out. The planet will heat up. Species will die out. But how many, how hot, and what survives depends on whether we act. The future is dark, she writes. The future is dark with a darkness as much of the womb as of the grave.